wanna take you for a ride. I wanna take you for a ride.
Let's go!
Jill Valentine has been released as a playable survivor for Resident Evil Resistance, and along with her debut, an image was released showing when the next edition of potential characters, maps, or updates will be added to the game. Upon seeing this, I thought to myself, as well as discussed with some of my friends, which characters I would like to see throughout Resident Evil Resistance's lifespan. As Jill was added to the game, it's evident that Capcom isn't going to restrict us to playing original characters only, as we've been playing so far. In light of this, I wanted to make a top 10 characters that I would personally like to see make an appearance in Resident Evil Resistance. At the number 10 spot, it may prove a bit controversial as the game harbors criticism as such, but I would personally like to see any member of the USS Delta Team from Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This, if you haven't played the game, is the Umbrella Security Service Team, and throughout Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, you can play as each member, including Vector, Lupo, Bertha, Spectre, Four Eyes, and Beltway. There isn't really an essential main character of this team in context of the game itself, but if they were to include only one, I believe Vector would be the most recognizable choice. However, any member of the team would be a nice callback to the forgotten game that was really a mixed bag in terms of fan approval. A lot of fans liked the game, and a lot of fans didn't like the game. However, these characters all have their specialties and skills, such as Spectre's primary skill being surveillance, or Beltway's specialty being demolition. All of these characters have their own personalities as well, so adding them into the game wouldn't need any retconning, and adding them into the lore of the game, if that were to be decided, would most likely be easy, as the ending of Operation Raccoon City involves the USS Delta Team gunning for Umbrella in a fury of rage, so I think that would be a pretty easy thing to work with. I think the character of Four Eyes could be used in an original way, as she is the field scientist of the USS Delta Team, so she specializes in research and experimentation. There could possibly be a skill she has where if you kill a certain zombie and bring its DNA to Four Eyes, you're able to have access to a special item, or know where a hidden item is on the map. Anyhow, each USS Delta Team member has their own specialty that could be utilized, and I would be happy to see any of them return in Resident Evil Resistance. Ada Wong has been an ever-mysterious presence throughout the Resident Evil series. From her first appearance in Resident Evil 2 to her latest appearance in Resident Evil 6, canonically, she has always been a questionable character in terms of why she is involved in a given situation, or what her intentions are with regards to her involvement. I think she would make a good character for Resident Evil Resistance because she has a lot of things to bring to the table in terms of character skills and originality. She is a spy, so I believe she could have an ability where she could allow for her, as well as other survivors, to sneak around zombies or the Mastermind's special enemies, as in Daniel's Mr. X or Nuts William Birkin. This would be relatively broken unless it was only for a very short amount of time, however. Ada could also allow for the induction of new weapons, either specific to her or for everybody else. Maybe her ammo box or crossbow. Being a trained spy, she could possibly have a melee ability similar to Jill, where she could perform either a parry or dodge. Either way, Ada Wong is a fan favorite character that I personally would love to see make a return in Resident Evil Resistance, and I think the majority of other fans would as well. Piers Nevins is a very cool and likable character, especially with regards to the relationship him and Chris Redfield share in Resident Evil 6. His relationships in other games range from... Oh, right. Piers has only been in one game. Yeah, one game. And he died in that one game. Piers' life definitely got cut short, and I think he was a well-developed enough character to the point of at least deserving to make an appearance in another game. And no, plays don't count. Piers could have an ability similar to Krauser's ability in Resident Evil 4, where he utilizes his BOW arm he receives at the end of Resident Evil 6. Since his BOW arm is powered by electricity, it could be used as a potential stunning technique for each Mastermind's unique enemy, or used to take out the power in a room, disabling cameras, traps, etc. However, this could also be programmed like a double-edged sword, where it could cut the lighting to whichever room Piers used it in. All in all, Piers is a great character that deserves to make a reappearance, and if not in a main series Resident Evil game, let it be Resistance. Now, I don't know much about Billy Coen, and to my knowledge, he doesn't have any spectacular abilities that could be utilized should he be implemented as a character in Resident Evil Resistance, but the fact is, like Piers, Billy has only been in one game, and the game isn't even recent. Resident Evil 0 was released 18 years ago in 2002, and he did make an appearance alongside Rebecca Chambers in Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, but that game played through the same events of Resident Evil 0, just through a railroad shooter perspective. Billy is an interesting character, and I believe seeing him reappear in Resident Evil Resistance would repopularize him, as well as simply putting him in another game, despite Resident Evil Resistance not being a story-based entry in the Resident Evil series. Steve Burnside is essentially a combination of Billy and Piers' characters. Steve is only in one game in which he dies, and he doesn't even reappear in any other Resident Evil media, including manga, any of the films, or even plays. Steve is a very likable character. He has the quips which are reminiscent of Leon, and the determination reminiscent of Chris. I would like to see Steve make an appearance in Resident Evil Resistance for a lot of the same reasons as Billy and Piers. The fact that he is a character universally liked by the Resident Evil fanbase, and that he deserves to be in another game. Steve could also bring his signature golden Lugers to Resident Evil Resistance as an added weapon to the roster, and his character design from Code Veronica could be updated as well. Also, like Piers, Steve's ability could be him mutating into his BOW form, which he assumes in Resident Evil Code Veronica. I believe this could be potentially programmed where he could do an immense amount of damage to any enemy, but at the cost of this, the player dies upon the time of the ability running out. There's a lot of cool things that could be added with Steve's character, and I hope they consider him making a return in Resident Evil Resistance. Jack Krauser is without a doubt one of the most iconic Resident Evil antagonists. His constant rivalry with Leon, his ruthless and unforgiving character, and the development of Krauser throughout the series all allow him to be a deserving character to be added in Resident Evil Resistance. Krauser, unlike everybody else previously on this list, could either be a survivor or a mastermind special enemy, in my opinion. If he were to be a survivor, he could bring his iconic bow and arrow that could either be only used by him or other survivors in the game. And he could have a special ability where he activates his BOW arm similar to Piers and use it to dispense a large amount of damage. Basically the same way he uses it in this boss fight in Resident Evil 4 as well as the Mercenaries mode in Resident Evil 4. If he were to be a mastermind enemy, I believe he could pose a threat utilizing a lot of the same abilities he uses during his boss fight in Resident Evil 4. With his chain attacks, he could definitely be annoying up close, and with his bow, he could attack the player from way longer ranges, unlike the current mastermind bosses in Resident Evil Resistance. Krauser is a very iconic character of the Resident Evil series, and I would be super excited if he were to be added, either as a survivor or a mastermind boss to Resident Evil Resistance. A good candidate for the spot of the mastermind character in Resident Evil Resistance would be either Sadler or Salazar. I was originally going to make these two characters have separate entries, but I realized they would both have similar aspects in terms of how they would antagonize the player. The unique enemy for either Sadler or Salazar could, in my opinion, either be Mendez or Garrador. Should it be Mendez, I think he could be a Nemesis-type presence. I would say for him to assume his boss form, but I think that should only make an appearance upon his health being very low, sort of like a last resort option. If it were to be Garrador, I think he could play very similarly to how he plays as the boss throughout Resident Evil 4, with him being very fast and very powerful, but at the same time being crippled by the fact he's mostly blind. I think how this could be programmed is that gunshots or hits with very loud melee weapons could alert Garrador and have him dash quickly over to wherever the noise was heard. However, to counter this, I think a decoy device could be added in the game to lead Garrador away from the team in order for the survivors to continue with the mission. Something specific to Salazar could be the induction of Vertigo as his special enemy. Vertigo, being one of Salazar's bodyguards, would make perfect sense. Vertigo could play similarly to how he plays in Resident Evil 4, being very fast and strong, and I think a special ability of Vertigo could be sneaking around where he can't be seen by the player, and then striking when the player least expects it, as he does to Leon in Resident Evil 4. There are definitely a lot of creative possibilities with Sadler and Salazar as masterminds in Resident Evil Resistance, and I hope I get to see them throughout the game's lifespan. Most likely to be expected on this list, Albert Wesker is my personal favorite villain in all of gaming, and he is without a doubt one of the most iconic villains in the Resident Evil series, if not the most iconic. Wesker would not only please fans, but bring a lot of new stuff to the table. Wesker could, in my opinion, be any of the three spots that a character can have in Resident Evil Resistance, those spots being a survivor, mastermind, or mastermind boss. If Wesker were to be a survivor, he could carry the classic samurai edge, maybe even the lightning hawk as well, and more so than his weapons, his specialty would be the combination of his supernatural speed and strength with his martial arts experience. His special ability could be him mutating into his Ouroboros form from Resident Evil 5, but at the same time it would be similar to Steve Burnside's special ability, where upon the ability's time running out, the player would die. If Wesker were to be a mastermind, he would, and should, be very powerful. Wesker as a boss, in my opinion, should essentially be the same as he is during his first boss fight in Resident Evil 5, where he is able to activate his super speed at any given time, and force the player to be constantly on the lookout for him, as he would have multiple chain attacks that the player could be put in. Wesker as a mastermind himself would be a very interesting and original take. I think he could potentially use the Ouroboros boss from Resident Evil 5 as his special enemy, and possibly use Ouroboros to infect the players, deteriorating their life slowly, through traps placed by the mastermind. All in all, Wesker would be an amazing addition to Resident Evil Resistance, and I would personally love to see the villain make a grand return. Coming in as the runner-up for the #1 spot, we have the tried and true original Alpha Team Stars member, the boulder-punching BSAA operative, Captain Chris Redfield. This was obligatory, basically. Chris is one of the best Resident Evil characters of all time, and fans would love playing as him in Resident Evil Resistance. Chris could add the classic Beretta 93R to the weapon roster, and his character style would be very similar to Jill, being a very powerful and agile offensive character. Now, simply for me personally, I'm not a fan of Resident Evil 7 Chris. I just personally don't like the design they went with for him. Chris's design from Resident Evil 1 was changed pretty drastically when Resident Evil 5 came around, so when he was changed again completely in Resident Evil 7, it made me just wonder why they went with such a creative decision. Although, it doesn't really matter which Chris gets added, that's all just personal opinion for me. I would just enjoy the induction of his design from Resident Evil 5 and 6, or even the earlier games like Code Veronica. Chris Redfield is a classic character to the Resident Evil series that has won the hearts of millions of fans around the world, and if he were to be added in Resident Evil Resistance, I'm sure people would adore his inclusion. And the #1 spot goes to, I think pretty obviously, the rookie cop turned special agent, love-struck lifesaver, Leon Scott Kennedy. Leon is without a doubt one of the best characters in Resident Evil history and gaming history in general, and he is loved by fans not only for his strict determination and moral spirit, but also his engaging and witty personality. We haven't seen Leon since Resident Evil 6 in terms of the games. Yes, we obviously got to experience that good old-fashioned Leon action with the Resident Evil 2 remake, but we haven't seen where Leon has been since the events of Resident Evil 6. Although Resistance is not a story-based game, and we would most likely get an already designed Leon from one of the previous games, him making another appearance in general would be great. For me personally, I wouldn't want to get Resident Evil 2 Remake Leon in the game. Hold on, don't lynch me, hear me out. Resident Evil 2 Leon is clearly all around great, but I think we should get a version of Leon we haven't seen in a while, or a new version of Leon. What I mean by this is the costume and assets from Resident Evil 2 Remake. That's not what I want to see in Resistance. I really like Leon's new physical look, like his face, hair, all that jargon that they introduced in the Resident Evil 2 Remake, but I think if we got Leon's new look with his Resident Evil 4 or 6 outfit, it would be combining the old with the new in a creative way. I think it would be cool to see some old-fashioned Resident Evil 4 weapons like maybe the Red 9 or Chicago Typewriter, to call back to the game that is considered the best Resident Evil game to a lot of fans. Leon would also have elements like Jill and Chris, where he would be very offensive and agile with a series of melee attacks to use against enemies. All in all, Leon would be a great addition to the game, and I know the vast majority of Resident Evil fans, if not all of them, will appreciate seeing him again. So, that was my little personalized list of the characters that I would like to see throughout the lifespan of Resident Evil Resistance. Did you find yourself agreeing with my choices? If so, awesome. If not, leave a comment below saying which characters you would like to see in Resident Evil Resistance. See you guys in the next video.
The voice of love, take you higher. 集まる力で研ぎ澄ま